until we get within, start putting our transects down. This is, okay, who knows what kind of tree this is? White pine, you sure?
No, it's a hemlock. It's a hemlock.
All right, it's a white pine. How do you know it's a white pine?
Deep-furrowed bark.
Good, deep-furrowed bark. What else?
All the greens at the top.
Good, all the green and dead stuff is way at the top. How many needles in a bundle?
5.
How big is their cone?
Big.
Real big, okay, good. This is about generally the start of where all the old white pines start to grow. It's kind of at an angle here, and then back off, especially on the left side of the path. Once we get further down the path, then we're going to start to see more white pines and old hemlocks cut off, kind of like the half right up here. This is, yeah, the big bark, the thick, deep-furrowed bark is a good character to look for. This is probably in a 300-year age class for pines. To see bark this deep, you just don't see it young, okay? And it takes a long time to get characters like this. All right, let's go up to this tree that's going on this rock right here. Okay, what kind of tree is this one?
Hemlock.
Good, it's hemlock. How do we know it's a hemlock?
The branches are long.
Branches are lower.
Good, we got a lot of lower branches.
Small needles, small cones.
Small needles. Are the needles grouped together in bundles or attached directly singly to the
Directly
branch?
to.
Good, attached to the branch. Now this is an old hemlock. I don't know how old it is, but it's centuries old, okay? And if we look on this tree, it has a number of old characters right on the tree. The first I would like to, I'd point out would be these crooked arm branches that come off to the side. In the back there's some look like kind of like corkscrews. If we look on the bark itself,
It's called the balding.
yeah, here's the balding tree. It's part of it. You can see this balding pattern right here. It's a thinner, let's say shallower bark. And you can see the pattern. Notice over here how you have, let's say, deep furrows over here. And then right about here, it's shallower. And then right here, it's fairly flat. Okay. When this pattern goes up the side of the tree a good distance, we can often get an idea. 3 here in the park, and one 180-footer, which is what we're working our way towards. If we look at, so I start throwing numbers around, people's eyes start glazing over, you know. But if we look at 160-footers outside of Pennsylvania and the rest of the Northeast, what are you looking at? 16, 17 now, Bob?
Looking at 15 in Massachusetts, about 7 in New Hampshire, and outside of Pennsylvania. In New York, we're not sure. Maybe 1.
Mm-hmm.
But that would be it.
Yep. So if we look at all the pines that we've got right here in Pennsylvania, and 160-foot class, it's still more that we've been able to find in the other northeastern states, excluding the Pennsylvania trees. We don't have one. We're close to a 170-footer in Mohawk.
Well, we do. It's right on.
Right on. Good. So that's great. So we got one other 170-footer that we know of. North of the Smokies, in terms of tall white pine in the 160-foot class or above, this is the spot to come to see it. So we're right on the edge of that. And the further we go in, the more we'll get into it. So there's many different other types of old growth characters. One I do want to show you real quick, is just off path, and we're going to walk down to the first tree we want to measure, is a more subtle character that we don't always get to see, and a good example. So why don't we walk off path, just follow me up the hill here just a little bit, and we'll show you another one.
They're on an old log.
On an old log, okay? Some of us call them nurse logs. These large dead down trees, eventually you get some moss on there and you'll get some water retention, and the seedlings will start to grow on that. Well, over a period of a couple centuries, that log is going to totally decompose, but you may be left with a couple of the seedlings that survived to great age. If you look through here, it looks like some might say, oh, Johnny Appleseed was back here. Or maybe on a younger forest, I see rows like this, and it's on the edge of an old logging road. Okay, or maybe in the edge of an old pasture. But back here, these trees surpass that historic time frame of pastures and logging for this area. So you're looking at pines that are 300 plus growing in a row. It's a pattern. That means it's there for a reason. And so those types of characters we don't always see in the east. You have to kind of look. Whereas out west, you get into the big conifer forests, and it's just amazing. All the bunch of characters that you'll see in one spot. And here, these are what we would call big pines, big conifers for Pennsylvania and the northeast, eastern United States. But out west, it's amazing. There you see some nurse logs that might be 10 feet across with 15-foot diameter trees growing over top of them. It's unreal, okay? But over here in the east, it's smaller scale, but it's still an old-growth forest. There's different types of old growth. Any questions?
Dale, maybe I can chime in just
Yeah.
a bit. One of the great people, great friend of mine, Dr. Mary Bird Davis, who passed away recently, back in the early 90s, we put together a book, Eastern Old Growth Forests, Old Growth in the East. A survey was the actual name of the book. We attempted to inventory every old growth forest in the East that we knew of, and she was an exceptional woman. She held a PhD in English, but she really became an ecologist, but she was very well organized. So she went to every state, talked to the Nature Conservancy, talked to the local land managers, talked to individuals. I was part of the network that did those books. Cook Forest was one of the first forests that we showcased, because Cook Forest was not only exceptional because of the big white pines and the hemlocks, but because the actual old growth area covered over maybe somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 acres. And that was exceptional in the east, outside of the big reserves like the Great Smoky Mountains National Park or the Adirondack Reserve. There's a lot of the time the old growth areas were counted with tens of acres, 5, 10, 20, 30 acres. So this has always been an absolutely outstanding example of that Pennsylvania forest, which was originally here and stretched across the state and had a combination of white pine and hemlock. The hemlock that we showed down there, another first for Pennsylvania, is it is the state with the oldest documented eastern hemlock, and we think it was now a projection to the pith, but it was aged at 988 years. Now again, we don't any longer think that was the actual age, but there have been many Pennsylvania hemlocks aged to between 500 and 600 years. So it pushes the absolute limit. Now we age hemlocks all the way up and down the Appalachians and out into Minnesota and throughout the entire range of the species. Some of the oldest are actually here in the general area of Pennsylvania. We have no idea why they are a little bit older than others, but oftentimes it devolves to subspecies that we haven't really even identified. A species we think we don't differentiate, and then we find there's a subspecies, a slight differentiation. I make that point and pass on to the final one. Dale and I have been friends for a long time, and we have two great forests of white pines in the Northeast. Cook Forest is one, and really the grandfather, grandmother property. The Mohawk Trail State Forest in Massachusetts is the other. And I've measured 123 white pines and mohawked over 150 feet. It's a younger forest. I'm sure Cook has more, we just haven't updated the inventory. And that's one of the things that we try to do, is keep this going. And yeah, it's a hint of a competition. It's really not, it's kind of staged but fun. But that's the only way I have seen, and I've had a lot of experience, folks, it's the only way I have seen that we keep a special property out front and open. I've seen so many of these properties that are special, and yet they're lost somehow they become anonymous almost. Once a sign has been put up, once something's been written about them, we lose track. They don't lose their special nature because they happen to be on a map and known. So one of the reasons we do these programs here in Cook repeatedly is we want people to come and renew their acquaintance with this great, great place.
Dale's talked about some of these old hemlocks and pine trees. They're conifers. There's old trees in here that are deciduous, means they lose their leaves every year. Here's an example. Who knows what kind of tree this is? This is a red oak. Yes, northern red oak. We don't have southern red oaks around here, so we just ignore them. But we want examples of deciduous trees, and conifers, a lot of times, the trees grow nice and straight, and on a regular area, sometimes the smaller trees are older, sometimes the bigger ones, but general rule of thumb, the bigger the tree is, the older they are. You know, if you're looking at big trees to core, I'd pick out the one that was the biggest to try to core it, or at least one that wasn't too big for my core borer, you know. And you find when you're looking at deciduous trees that it's not always the biggest tree that's the oldest. Most times the biggest trees are simply ones that happen to be grown on a better microsite, and they tend to grow faster. That's why they're bigger. At least half the time, the oldest tree on a site that's a deciduous tree is one that's just average size, but has other characteristics that make it stick out. For example, you look at this one, what do you see about it? It's all twisty and sinuous. It corkscrews upwards. That's a sign of a lot of old trees. They tend to have the sinuous type nature. It's got some balding on some sides of it. It's got this big scar where the bark is missing. It corkscrews up around it. I don't know what that came from. Maybe a lightning strike or something went down the tree, and it's sort of decayed. You look up at the top, you see how broken, and the big branches up there are broken. There's just little knobs, and what's there is all kind of mutilated. And that any tree that you look at that's been had its head up in the canopy for 200 years or 300 years is going to get a lot of wind damage. So that's a good another characteristic to look at for trees is ones that their tops are all mutilated from years and years of having their heads stuck up in the air and exposed to all those winter storms. I just want to say that there's other characteristics to look at, particularly for deciduous trees, is they get balding too. They tend to have this twisted nature for really old ones. The tops tend to be mutilated. And if you look, as you walk up the trail, there's a number of these trees that show this characteristic.
Okay, this general area, right in this general area is where the Longfellow Pine is. When we do our hikes generally with the public, we've already teased them with a couple of heights of trees along the way, and we have them guess and see who's the closest guess. But the thing is from where we're standing, we can't see the top of the tree that we really want to measure. Because around us here, we've got a number of trees, several trees that are in the 160-foot class. Several that are in the 150-foot class. And it's often tough to just, as you're looking at this area, I don't see many crowns, I see many trunks. And it's very hard to find that point through this multi-canopy layer that you could actually see the top. So this is where it gets tricky. The Longfellow Pine is, it's actually, if you look in this direction, you've got two pines, that I'm pointing at. One on the right, one on the left. The one on the left is it. And if you stand in this general area, if you look up, it's partially obscured, but you can see a scar. Looks like a teardrop or a raindrop shaped scar up that trunk. Yeah. And this tree, in 1997, we had that Old Growth Forest Conference here. They came through and identified this, and I think it was 178.1.
179.
179.1. And that was quite a surprise for everybody, because here at the park, we didn't know we had anything that was like that. Probably the common mindset before that is that, well, yeah, there's some nice trees here, but, you know, it'd be about 140 feet or so. And so over the years, we've been coming back and remeasuring the tree. If we were to average it out over the last 10 or so years we've been measuring this, we're looking at anywhere from maybe 2 to 4/10 of a foot of growth roughly every year. This was climbed, I think it was 2001, if I got my year right. Was it 3? Do you remember what year it was?
I think it was 1.
2001. It's probably the first one. Will Blozan couldn't make it here today. He's the president of Native Tree Society, and has climbed, probably has the most tall tree record climbs of anybody in the eastern United States, and has his own arborist business. And he's the one usually that he's the only one we've had climb trees here. So what they did, they came back here before the main group got here and got their line set. If you haven't seen anybody go up some of these big tall trees, I mean, there's no way you can physically throw a throw bag over that first bottom limb that's up there. So you got to get your limb, your weight, your line over there. So, they've got a tall slingshot, it's about 6-8 feet high, but you got a weight tied on the end of your line, and you shoot that line up over that. If you look up, you can see that first branch that kind of wise to the left. That's where the rope hit. So you just inchworm your way up with the climbing gear, and that's where we first really touched the tree. So, and then from there, climbed up to around 165 or so feet. We got a pole up to him, and then he anchored himself in, and then we got a pole measurement from the top, but from where he was at in the tree was a plumb bob distance down. And at the time we did our lasers, I think we were within a foot of the actual height of the tree. It was probably even a little less than that. But so the method works, and it's repeatable, and but we rarely go to those kind of extremes to check our measurements. But if you do it that way accurately, you can often get within a plus or minus 1 inch. If you've got the correct, the right laser equipment, you can get that consistently. Most of us don't have that kind of a budget, but I mean, that's what you can actually do if you really get into trying to measure these trees. So anybody have a question or something anybody wants to add on to that? Okay, I think what we're going to do is kind of break up and try and find a spot where you can see the top of the tree. Okay, now I'm going to save everybody a little bit of time. I've got a couple places that I know. Bob probably has a couple places that he knows where you can reach in. This probably isn't the safest place to stand, but if you stand underneath that Widowmaker right there, okay, you probably will have a pretty good view of the top of the tree. But that usually isn't where we can't see the whole crown of that tree from that point. So I'm going to go to a spot where I usually go and see if I can get my laser through. Bob spent a lot of time here yesterday. He's probably got a pretty good idea on where his best view is. I'm going to see what I can get from my usual spot and see where everybody else goes. I'm going to put this tripod up on the bottom. Where I usually put the base is I usually shoot it from the other side, and so I'm going to stick that up and see what we get.
Can we look and see? Because I put a pin down there where your base was versus mine.
Yeah. Steve, bring that pole. We'll kind of extend that out so we get a good view of parts.
I pick where it's done.
To get the throw line there, he's saying it should be fairly open here.
Yeah, but that would be a hell of a shot.
Get the full 30 you got.